here is compassion. The politics is purpose.
You may be termed out here, but does cleaning up the streets of California factor into a potential presidential run?
I'm never going to overpromise that in the short run. I mean, we are struggling in this state.
You're not answering my question.
No, housing and homelessness.
So the piece that I published is titled Newsom's National Model for Homeless, Racked by Fraud. It's published for Real Clear Investigations. There's original reporting in there. This is actual journalism. It's not just me commenting. In fact, I'm not allowed to share my opinion at all.
Something wild just happened. Anna Kasparian didn't debate Gavin Newsom. She threw him into a rhetorical blender, hit turbo, and walked away whistling. What began as a normal political exchange quickly turned into a masterclass in sharp receipts, awkward pauses, and one governor desperately searching for a lifeline. If you're into chaos, accountability, and moments so brutal they make you gasp and laugh at the same time, buckle up, because the ending hits harder.
To support building more reservoirs in the state in order to bulk up our water infrastructure because we live in a drought-prone state. That passed in 2014. Funding was attached to it. You want to know how many reservoirs have been built since 2014? Zero. This state is an utter joke because of the people who are governing it. Gavin Newsom right now is at the top.
Somewhere in the vast multiverse of political confidence, Gavin Newsom woke up that day expecting another smooth glide through polished talking points, flattering studio lights, and the comforting illusion that charisma could stand in for real policy.
For me, when I signed on to criminal justice reform, what I thought I was signing on to was we're going to reform our prisons. But the idea of, oh, we're just not going to punish anyone for pretty much anything is not what I thought I was signing up for. But that's pretty much what we've gotten. And preemptively shutting down, 4 to 5 state prisons without really having a plan in place for what happens to oftentimes like violent inmates was a disastrous idea by Gavin Newsom, to be honest.
If you're enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you think. Instead, he walks straight into a conversational blender, run calmly, efficiently, and with unsettling precision by Anna Kasparian. No flashing warning signs, no dramatic soundtrack, just the quiet hum of logic slowly powering up.
Look at the talent in the Democratic Party right now. People are going to get mad at me for saying this, but I genuinely feel there isn't much. I don't know who the next leader of this party is going to be. Everyone is kind of singing the praises of Gavin Newsom. I live in California. He's the governor here. He's a disaster of epic proportions.
Right.
Most Americans don't know that yet, but if he's going to be the leader of the opposition and if he's the Democratic candidate in 2028, I think this country's in a lot of trouble.
I mean,
Anna Kasparian didn't storm in like a wrecking ball. That would have been too obvious. She arrived like a librarian who already knows you didn't read the book, but still calmly asks about chapter 7, of course.
I don't know if I can.
Please,
Okay.
you must. It's a necessity.
So Democratic establishment candidates are full of shit. And I need people to understand that. And we need to get out of this vicious pendulum swing cycle where we go from one terrible administration to another terrible administration. They just have different branding. But in the end, they do nothing for ordinary people. And that's what people are hungry for. I think that's part of what explains the popularity.
Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom began exactly where he always does. Confidence cranked to 11, optimism flowing freely, words arranged so beautifully they could be framed and hung in a campaign office. Everything sounded great, inspirational, even cinematic. If politics were judged purely on vibes, Gavin Newsom would have won an Oscar by minute 3. But Anna Kasparian doesn't operate in the land of vibes. She lives in the far less forgiving world of outcomes and consequences. Those inconvenient details that show up uninvited and refuse to leave. She listened, she nodded, she let Gavin paint the picture, and then, with surgical calm, she started asking questions that behaved like termites in a wooden narrative. Slow, quiet, relentless. The shift was subtle at first. Gavin spoke like someone used to friendly rooms, agreeable nods, and applause that arrives right on cue. Anna Kasparian responded like someone armed with receipts, spreadsheets, and a deep allergy to nonsense. Every time Gavin leaned into a hopeful abstraction, Anna gently pulled the conversation back to earth with a simple, cutting reality check. Okay, but how's that actually going? And you could feel the air change. Not dramatically, just enough to make confidence start to sweat.
in the first place. Just let us keep our own money and then we wouldn't need all your stupid programs.
That's right. There's actually something called the corruption tax. It's not a real tax, but it's actually there. We pay more than we need to because of the corruption that politicians engage in.
There's a lot of BS out there about how it's working, when in reality it's not. We already have 2 federal criminal indictments related to this program.
I call it the unholy trinity of Gavin Newsom. You have the homelessness, which is a complete shambles, and also the speed rail that went nowhere.
Oh my God.
It's basically
What made it hilarious wasn't that Gavin Newsom said anything shocking. It's that he said all the familiar lines, the greatest hits, the political version of a worn-out playlist that still sounds fine until it's played next to reality. Anna Kasparian didn't interrupt the song. She simply pointed out that the speakers weren't plugged into anything. There's a special kind of comedy when someone keeps insisting progress is happening while standing beside proof that it isn't. Gavin talked about leadership. Anna talked about results. Gavin talked about vision. Anna talked about lived experience. It was like watching someone sell a luxury car while the wheels quietly rolled away. And the best part, Anna never raised her voice, not once. That was the real flex. She didn't need volume, she had momentum. Every answer Gavin gave opened the door to a follow-up that made the previous answer look like it needed adult supervision. You could almost see Gavin's internal GPS recalculating, desperately searching for a route back to safer ground.
Gives you a sense of what these local politicians really care about, and it's themselves, their own political careers, and it disgusts me. Gavin Newsom, in every single interview I've seen him do, has passed the buck, even though he is the governor of this state.
Yeah.
He is pathetic. He's a snake. He's like the slimiest Democratic politician, certainly on a local level. But what we have seen is mismanagement of epic proportion.
At some point, the conversation crossed that invisible line where confidence stops sounding confident and starts sounding rehearsed. Gavin Newsom leaned harder into optimism, which is usually the first sign optimism is being used as a flotation device. Anna Kasparian let it happen. She let the words stack up and then introduced something devastating: specificity. Specificity is kryptonite to political spin. You can't charm your way around it. You can't pivot gracefully past it. You either have it or you don't. Gavin tried to float above the details. Anna calmly pulled them into the spotlight like, no. Let's stay right here for a second. Suddenly the room felt smaller. The humor came from how polite the dismantling was. No insults, no smirks. Just a tone that made every pivot attempt feel like watching someone try to moonwalk out of a maze. The more Gavin zoomed out, the more Anna zoomed in. It became a tug of war between abstraction and reality has a nasty habit of winning when someone refuses to let go.
It's very likely that he is going to point to his signature homeless housing policy as what will be a national model for solving the very real problem of homelessness in the United States. And if anyone is enticed by his campaigning on that, you should know that that signature policy, known as Project Home Key, has been riddled with fraud, scathing audits, and at this point, 2 criminal.
What really elevated the comedy was how familiar the whole thing felt. Everyone watching has seen this movie before. The politician promises a brighter future. The journalist points to the present. The politician praises the system. The journalist asks why that system keeps producing the same problems. Gavin Newsom played his role perfectly. Anna Kasparian rewrote the script by refusing to pretend the ending was already happy. At one point, it felt less like an interview and more like a performance review Gavin didn't realize he was scheduled for. Anna wasn't hostile. She was thorough, and thoroughness is terrifying when you're used to applause instead of follow-ups. Every unanswered question just sat there, growing heavier by the second, like an awkward pause that refuses to fade. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone bring a PowerPoint mindset into a conversation full of bulletproof questions. Gavin came armed with polish. Anna came armed with clarity, and clarity doesn't blink. It doesn't rush. It just waits for the truth to catch up with the words. The sarcasm practically floated through the room without needing to be spoken, but Anna wasn't grading on sound, she was grading on substance. And suddenly all that polish didn't matter, because the questions weren't impressed.
Existence, and it is real, the existence of climate change should not be utilized as a talking point in order to pass the buck, in order to deflect blame, in order to refuse to take any personal responsibility for how poorly this state has been governed for several years now. I am so disgusted with these people. I mean, Newsom is the governor. He's the top dog in California.
The audience could feel it too, that shared realization that this wasn't a shouting match. It was something far worse for a politician, a calm, reasoned exposure of how thin the narrative becomes once it leaves its comfort zone. Gavin Newsom didn't implode. He didn't snap. He just slowly ran out of room. Anna Kasparian has a rare ability to let silence do the work. She'd ask a question, let Gavin answer, and then pause. Just long enough for everyone to process what wasn't said. That pause landed harder than any interruption ever could. It's the kind of silence that makes people at home lean forward and think, oh, and that's why it lingered. Because it didn't end with a mic drop. It ended with unanswered questions hanging in the air like unpaid bills. Questions that don't vanish when the cameras shut off. Questions that follow narratives around and tap them on the shoulder later.
Reporting, I now understand for the first time in my life why it takes journalists sometimes months to work on a story and publish a story. But with that in mind, I want to share the details of what I've learned and why we need to hold members of our own party accountable when they're engaged in wrongdoing, when they're engaged in policies that actually end up stealing money from taxpayers while simultaneously making the problem that they're supposedly trying to fix a lot worse.
This wasn't Anna Kasparian trying to dunk on Gavin Newsom. It was Anna refusing to let him float above reality unchecked. And that's far more dangerous, because once people see that contrast, they can't unsee it. The funniest part is that it didn't feel like a climax. It felt like the start of something uncomfortable, like spotting the first loose thread in a sweater that suddenly looks very pullable. Anna didn't yank it, she just showed it was there. And once you notice it, it's hard not to keep tugging. That's where the real comedy slips in. Gavin didn't technically lose control of the conversation. He lost control of the illusion that he ever had it. That's a quieter kind of disaster. The type that doesn't trend right away but settles in later when people replay the exchange and realize how often the answers sounded impressive without actually answering anything. The room wasn't crashing, it was shaking. And instead of panicking, she asked why the seatbelt sign was still off. That's the kind of question that doesn't explode on impact. It just keeps rattling around in your head long after the conversation ends.
Well, essentially what he did was bail out PG&E, even though PG&E essentially started the fires in Paradise, California.
Right.
They couldn't be bothered to replace a $10 hook that was nearly 100 years old, and that hook was holding the power lines up.
Right.
So just think about that. These hooks are basically falling apart. Power lines are falling. We have dry conditions in California. And so it's a tinderbox. We live in a
What made it even funnier was how much effort went into maintaining composure. Gavin Newsom never raised his voice, never snapped, never openly bristled, but you could feel the tension in the way his responses started looping, that subtle repetition giving things away. Anna Kasparian never went for the easy jab, never reached for sarcasm outright. She let the moment create its own irony. Gavin talked about progress as if it were self-evident, and the implication was brutal because it suggested the issue wasn't bad intentions, it was bad execution. That's a much harder charge to dodge. You can argue ideology, you can deflect criticism, but execution lives in the real world, where people notice when things don't work the way they were advertised. Anna didn't accuse Gavin of not caring. She questioned whether caring was enough, and that question landed like a tax audit on optimism.
I just care about a lot. And I think that as we head to the 2028 presidential election and basically deal with Gavin Newsom's campaigning, it's really important for people to understand what his leadership actually looks like. And one of the policies that he's very likely going to tout as what he sees as a national model is this Project Home Key policy. But the fact of the matter is, it's just been one disaster after another. I'm not saying that
the pacing of it all was almost cruel. Gavin Newsom would deliver a sweeping statement, the kind that sounds perfect clipped for social media, and then Anna Kasparian would narrow the frame, tighten the lens, and suddenly that grand statement looked painfully alone without specifics to hold it up. It was like watching someone toss confetti into the air while Anna calmly pointed out there was no floor beneath it. By then, the contrast had fully crystallized. Gavin represented the polished surface of governance, where messages encouraging rains and narratives are carefully curated and insulation works great until someone pokes a hole and lets the outside temperature rush in. Anna didn't tear the insulation away, she just opened a window. By the end, it felt less like a clash and more like a demonstration of what happens when power meets preparation, when polish meets persistence, when a carefully managed narrative meets someone who refuses to accept it at face value. Gavin didn't fall apart. He simply ran out of narrative runway.